On February 19, 1945, 1,000 Japanese soldiers vanished into a mangrove swamp off the coast of Burma. For decades, the world has looked at this event as a monster story. We focus on the jaws. We focus on the screaming. We focus on the Guinness World Record. But the truth is much colder and much more terrifying. Those men weren't killed by animals. The animals were just the executioners. The soldiers were killed hours earlier by a signature on a piece of paper. This is not a story about bad luck. It is a story about a command system that was so rigid, so obsessed with honor, that it marched 1,000 men into a meat grinder because the paperwork said go. The tragedy of Ramree Island isn't that nature attacked. It's that the soldiers were ordered to walk into a trap that nature had set, and they were forbidden from walking out. Welcome to Shadow Frontlines. The system, the trap of honor. To understand the massacre, you have to look at the decision that triggered it. Colonel Nagazawa, the Japanese commander, was trapped. The British Royal Navy had Ramree Island surrounded. His supplies were cut. His ammunition was low. He faced a binary choice. Option A, surrender, save his men, sit out the rest of the war in a POW camp. Option B, retreat through 10 miles of hell to reach the mainland. In any modern army, option A is the logical choice. When you are checkmated, you flip the king. But Nagazawa was operating under the Senjin-kun, the field service code issued by General Tojo. The code was explicit. Do not live in shame as a prisoner. Die and you shall not leave a bad name behind you. This system removed logic from the equation. It made surrender a spiritual crime worse than death. So the system forced option B. Nagazawa ordered the retreat through the Ramree mangroves. He knew the terrain was hostile. He knew it was a maze of deep mud and tidal creeks. But he treated the swamp like a map problem. He calculated distance. He calculated march speed. He made a tactical plan for a battlefield that didn't exist. The environment, the rising tide. The march began in the late afternoon, and almost immediately the system began to fail against the reality of the terrain. Ramree isn't just a forest, it is a tidal swamp. When the tide is out, it is miles of sticky black mud that sucks the boots off your feet. But Nagazawa missed the most critical variable, the tide. As night fell, the tide began to come in. The water level rose. The mud turned into a soup. Soldiers who were walking on solid ground suddenly found themselves waist deep in salt water. To keep moving, the men had to make impossible choices. Carry a rifle or carry the heavy radio equipment. They dropped the radios. In that moment, the column was severed. The commander lost his voice. He could no longer issue orders to the rear guard. The unit dissolved into 1,000 isolated individuals struggling in the dark. And then the secondary effects set in. Leeches, mosquitoes, thorns that sliced through uniforms. Open wounds were soaked in dirty swamp water. The scent of fresh blood began to drift across the surface just as the water level rose high enough to let the predators in. The tactical failure, an impossible order. Ramree Island is home to the saltwater crocodile. These are not simple predators. They are the apex of evolution. They can grow to 20 feet long and weigh as much as a truck. They are ambush hunters. They use the tide to move inland. The first casualties were silent. A soldier at the back of the line would slip. His comrades would hear a splash. They would assume he fell. They would whisper his name. No answer. Just the sound of the water settling. Then the panic set in. And this is where the tragedy peaked. As the screaming started, the Japanese officers tried to do what they were trained to do, establish a perimeter. We know from survivors that officers were shouting orders: form a line, interlocking fire, stand your ground. They tried to apply military doctrine to a nature attack. But you cannot form a firing line in waist-deep water. You cannot dig a foxhole in mud. By ordering his men to hold and fight, the officers actually killed them. If they had dropped their rifles and ran, some might have lived, but they followed the procedure, and the procedure kept them stationary, clustered together, creating a buffet for the frenzy that was closing in. The observers, the cacophony of hell. A few miles away, on the HMS Paladin, the British sailors were on high alert. They were expecting a Japanese counterattack. They were listening for the sound of boat engines or marching boots. Instead, they heard a nightmare. Bruce Wright, the naturalist on board, recorded the scene in his diary. He wrote, "The scattered rifle shots in the pitch-black swamp were punctured by the screams of wounded men crushed in the jaws of huge reptiles." He described the sound as a cacophony of hell. Imagine being on that ship, safe, dry, drinking tea, and listening to 1,000 men being disassembled in the dark, knowing there was absolutely nothing you could do to help them. The British didn't fire a shot that night. They didn't have to. The swamp was doing the work for them. The aftermath. The red water. By dawn, the screaming stopped. The tide went out, revealing the carnage. Vultures circled overhead, hundreds of them. Of the roughly 1,000 soldiers who entered the swamp, only about 20 stumbled out to the British lines to surrender. Historians today debate the numbers. Was it 1,000? 500? Did disease kill half of them before the animals arrived? But the math doesn't change the horror. Whether it was 50 predators or 500, the result was the same. A commander ordered his men into a place where humans do not belong. He thought his system, his discipline, his honor could defeat nature. He was wrong. The final implication. The horror of Ramree Island isn't the crocodiles. The horror is that there was no other possible outcome. The system demanded a retreat. The system demanded no surrender. And the system demanded tactical formations that physically couldn't exist in that terrain. The soldiers were trapped in a logic loop that ended in death. It forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. If you were standing in that mud, holding a radio that didn't work, waiting for an order that made no sense, would you have the courage to break the rules, or would you hold the line until the end? Let me know in the comments. Next week, we're investigating the Vampire of the Philippines, a CIA psychological operation that used local superstition to break a rebellion. Subscribe to Shadow Frontlines. I'll see you in the shadows.